You may be watching this video on a device that, in order to exist, has traveled around the world. It may sound like an exaggeration, but it isn't. You have before you the result of a process of economic integration that has taken decades, involving Taiwan with its microchips, South Korea with its lithium cell batteries, cobalt from Congo, and nickel from Indonesia, a RAM memory from Singapore and speakers from Germany, with a glass screen made in Japan and its internal components in South Korea that were assembled in China. And it works with an operating system created in the United States, among a dozen countries with direct and indirect contributions. It is a true miracle that has helped a large part of the world's population escape poverty and hunger. It is a phenomenon that has shaped the world as we know it for decades, erasing geographical barriers and limitations. And it has been the foundation of the period of greatest prosperity and technological advances in human history. But now, it could be on the verge of disappearing, marking the beginning of a new era, with devastating consequences ranging from economic stagnation to famine. Welcome to the end of globalization. International trade is not new and dates back hundreds of years. However, the international trade that developed in the past through maritime routes and advancements in navigation was very different from the present one. It was characterized by trade between empires and their own colonies. Additionally, constant conflicts between them, seeking to steal their rivals' goods, were prevalent. This made trade limited, inefficient, and costly. This limited the growth of countries because their geography served as a grounding pole for what they could achieve. For instance, if a country lacked fertile land, its food supply was limited, and it was susceptible to famines if its population grew too much. If a country lacked the capacity to produce energy, it couldn't industrialize. And anything developed within a country was heavily restricted by the raw materials produced within it, with imports often scarce and limited to luxury goods. This resulted in low levels of specialization because each country had to produce virtually everything it consumed. This led to inefficient allocation of capital and human resources, with 60% of people working in food production at the beginning of the 20th century, the century that would shape the globalized world, beginning with the end of the Second World War. The world would be divided into two, the United States and the Soviet Union, each seeking to expand their sphere of influence and implement their economic and governance systems in other countries. The United States, with the world's largest navy, chose to consolidate its influence through trade. It protected maritime trade routes of its allies in exchange for their non-alignment with the communists. While people may consider these routes safe at sea, they actually require significant protection against pirates, criminal groups, and other governments. In the 1950s and 1960s, the United States initiated agreements like EFTA and EEC with European countries, CAFTA with Central American countries, and LAFTA with Latin America. This change was drastic for the world, as it began to establish more and more trade ties and interconnections. These developments allowed for the breaking of geographic barriers and enabled countries to specialize in what they could produce best. It freed up human resources, capital, and cooperation, leading to rapid technological development. Moreover, it provided access to economies of scale and reduced production costs. This trend was amplified in 1979 when China joined the alliance and began to attract foreign investment to produce goods in the country, leveraging its large population and low costs. The microchip, which serves as the foundation of modern technology, is perhaps the main product of globalization. While initially produced entirely in the United States, the current version requires globalization. It relies on machinery from Germany, Japan, and the United States, lithography machines that are produced in the Netherlands and use software from the United States. Materials are sourced from Japan and Singapore. Designs come from companies in the United States, Japan, and Korea. Finally, production is completed in Taiwan and South Korea. Each country specializes in a few parts of the process and is unable to produce the most advanced version completely on its own. In the 1990s, globalization would once again be amplified thanks to the development of the Internet, which allowed for the expansion of not only goods, but also services and information trade. Globalization is credited with much of the technological advancements in recent decades and being the foundation of accelerated global economic growth. It has increased productivity, specialization, and economies of scale, enabling the production and sale of products and services at much lower prices. It is partially responsible for the world's low inflation in recent decades. Moreover, it is attributed to the reduction of extreme poverty, increased life expectancy, and the decrease in malnutrition-related deaths in virtually all countries worldwide. However, like everything else, globalization has also caused significant damage.
Free trade is wonderful for the world and for the United States, but its benefits are diffused among 320 million people. You buy your bananas cheaper because we don't try and produce them in the United States. But the penalties from free trade are terrible to specific industries. And as an investor, I can make a dumb decision on owning a shoe company, but if I own a good insurance company, I can diversify away the problems. If you're a 55-year-old steel worker, you can't diversify away your talents. I mean, you had it. If steel or textiles or shoes become subject to total, it all moves offshore. So you want to have free trade, but you also have to take care of the people who, through no fault of their own, have spent their life learning one profession. And you can talk about retraining and all that, but it just isn't practical.
In the 1990s, a change in attitude towards globalization became evident, especially from the country that initially drove its expansion. The fall of the Soviet Union meant that the reason behind protecting trade routes and patrolling oceans in exchange for non-alignment with communism no longer existed. Furthermore, the middle class in the United States was among the major losers of globalization, especially those belonging to the non-specialized working class who witnessed their industries migrating to Asia and Latin America. This even led to the emergence of the so-called Rust Belt. It refers to a region in the northeastern and midwestern United States that used to be a significant industrial center, particularly in steel production and manufacturing. Its decline resulted in high unemployment rates, population decrease, and the appearance of deteriorated and abandoned urban areas. While other developed countries have implemented social programs to prevent these workers from being left behind, the same cannot be said for the United States. Thus, some of the greatest contrasts between those benefiting from globalization and those affected by it can be observed in the U.S., with inequality increasing significantly. This dissatisfaction caused by inequality, which is not limited to Americans, has been materializing for decades but had its main trigger in 2016.
The TPP, in my view, is a continuation of disastrous trade policies. Enough is enough. We need new approaches to trade, which creates jobs in America and not in China.
I'm going to withdraw the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which has not yet been ratified. So, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is another disaster, done and pushed by special interests who want to rape our country, just a continuing rape of our country. That's what it is, too. It's a harsh word. It's a rape of our country.
The 2016 elections in the United States stood out due to the presidential candidates Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, as they broke away from the usual mold of American politicians. Although they were ideologically opposed, both strongly opposed the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, which aimed to promote trade in the Asia-Pacific region. But this event was not the only one identified by analysts as part of the initial phase of the deglobalization process. Brexit was another significant event, where the United Kingdom voted in favor of leaving the European Union. Donald Trump was elected president, defeating Hillary Clinton, and a significant part of his platform was based on the idea of America First, advocating for the country to invest its resources domestically and reduce its involvement abroad. Moreover, he strongly emphasized blaming an enemy for the issues faced by the American middle class.
China, 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 China. You take China.
China.
China. I love them. China.
This message resonated with many individuals who had been affected by globalization and hoped for a return of production to the country. In 2018, a trade war between the United States and China began when President Donald Trump imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from various countries, including China. In July of the same year, he imposed a 25% tariff on a wide range of Chinese products, accusing the country of unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft. China responded by imposing tariffs on American products such as soybeans, automobiles, and chemicals. This trade war has continued to escalate since then. Regardless of whether these decisions were right or wrong, they marked the beginning of a trend and made it clear that a considerable portion of the public was dissatisfied with globalization. This dissatisfaction would intensify significantly just a year later, marking the start of the second phase. The COVID virus triggered the closure of borders and revealed the commercial interdependence that had been created between countries. Supermarkets around the world experienced rapid shortages in the early weeks of lockdown. Although restrictions gradually eased over time and production chains were restored, there were lasting consequences for globalization. On one hand, it became evident that the world had become highly dependent on China for production. China's implementation of a zero-COVID policy caused serious problems for many companies. As a result, they decided to diversify their production chains beyond the Asian giant, a concept known as China Plus One. This highlighted a shift in focus from producing wherever is most cost-effective to seeking diversified and resilient supply chains. Other countries began to realize that they had become entirely reliant on others for many of their raw materials, food, energy, and basic goods. This dependency would intensify with the third phase of deglobalization.
Germany will become totally dependent on Russian energy if it does not immediately change course. Here in the Western Hemisphere, we are committed to maintaining our independence from the encroachment of expansionist foreign powers. It has been the formal policy of our country since President Monroe.
Creating trade ties with other countries served for decades as a form of diplomacy to avoid war. However, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Europe, especially Germany, which is its industrial engine, found itself completely dependent on Russian natural gas. This dependence was crucial for electricity production and petrochemical manufacturing, such as fertilizers. In response to this invasion, Europe, the United States, South Korea, Japan, and other countries imposed sanctions on Russia with the aim of crippling its economy and making it impossible for them to finance the war. Furthermore, the sale of advanced technology was prohibited to prevent the production of weaponry using such technology. Beyond the exact effects on the Russian economy, which cannot be determined with certainty, it caused products such as microchips, food, and energy to be seen as strategic resources. This deepened a paradigm shift that had been occurring since the pandemic, where governments began to view many products in terms of national security. And the United States has initiated programs like the Inflation Reduction Act and Chips for America, aiming to increase domestic production by attracting companies through subsidies. This has been appealing to many European companies that, due to the suspension of Russian gas supply, can no longer operate as efficiently as before. And to TSMC, the leading Taiwanese microchip company that is also investing in production facilities in Arizona. Meanwhile, Germany, which had built its heavy industry around the supply of Russian natural gas, is now facing serious challenges. Not only has it seen increased costs in energy and fertilizer production, where natural gas is a primary raw material, but it is also experiencing a shortage of workers. This could mark the beginning of the fourth phase of deglobalization. Globalization facilitated industrial development, leading to significant migration of people to cities. This migration is one of the main factors contributing to declining birth rates, resulting in a decreasing number of children and an overall older population. Since young adults tend to have the highest consumption levels, industrialized countries with aging populations typically export more than they import. Internally, consumption is low, but domestic production remains high. The problem is that this aging population has caused many countries to resort to programs to attract migrants because they are running out of workers. Additionally, population aging could lead to reduced or stagnant consumption, resulting in loss of economies of scale, increased costs, and, in many cases, a lack of justification for maintaining international trade. If this scenario unfolds, it is expected that there will be a loss of efficiency and specialization, leading to increased production costs and making domestic production more profitable in certain cases. While this may benefit some individuals, it would adversely affect all consumers in general, who would also be impacted by higher taxes to support the non-working elderly population. However, the worst situation would be for countries that are unable to produce their own food and rely on exports to generate income for purchasing it from others. If those exports depend on economies of scale, high capital investment, or sufficient demand for raw materials, these countries could face serious problems. This could result in deindustrialization as they redirect capital and human resources towards food production. And those without sufficiently fertile land may experience complex episodes of famine. Globalization has been a process unfolding for nearly a century, and its end will not happen overnight. It is likely to evolve and transform into different forms. Some analysts consider it probable that there will be a shift towards more regional trade, while others have identified trends towards value-based alliances. In these alliances, countries with similar worldviews engage in trade despite geographical distances. However, it is important to clarify that despite the phases experienced in deglobalization, its ultimate conclusion is not guaranteed. In fact, the relationship between global trade and the economy shows stagnation rather than a complete reversal. Moreover, history is not the same for all countries, and while larger economies are reconsidering their stance on globalization or being compelled to do so by circumstances, others may see a radical increase in their international trade in the coming years. This could be the case for countries like Mexico, Vietnam, and India, and the economy and people, with their ability to adapt, could give an interesting twist to this story. If you want to learn more about the global economic trends that are shaping the world, I recommend watching the following video on the population crisis.